was sitting in the courtroom, waiting to hear the verdict that would destroy my entire life, charged for crimes that had been staged by the very husband I once trusted and his mistress. I had prepared myself to lose everything: my reputation, my job, my freedom, until the moment the entire room held its breath, when my son, who had never spoken a word, suddenly stood up before the court. Before you hear this story, share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know, if you were in my place, what would you do when you were betrayed by your own family? On the morning of October 15th, the Seattle sky was gray and drizzling, the kind of lingering Pacific Northwest rain that seemed to seep into the bones and reflect the darkest shadows of my deepest fears. Sitting in my Honda Civic in the parking lot of the King County Courthouse, watching the raindrops streak down the windshield, I couldn't stop thinking that this might be the last morning I would live as a free woman. In just 2 hours, I would face a jury of 12 strangers, people who would decide whether I had embezzled nearly $200,000 from my own business or not. A crime I never committed, one that had been carefully staged by the people I had trusted with my very life. My name is Lauren Ashcroft, and at 37 years old, I had built a life I believed was solid and respectable. My small branding company, Polar Light Creative, was based in a converted warehouse in the artsy Fremont district, where the exposed brick walls displayed logos and campaigns I had created for dozens of local businesses over the past 8 years. Starting with just a laptop, a relentless work ethic, and an eye for design that seemed to fit perfectly with Seattle's startup spirit, I had grown the company from a one-woman operation into a thriving business with 6 employees and a client list that included some of the city's most innovative startups. My work consumed my 20s in ways that were probably not entirely healthy, but it gave me a sense of necessity and purpose. While my friends were getting married and having children, I stayed up all night to meet deadlines, networked at industry events, and slowly built a reputation so that clients came to me instead of the other way around. The sacrifices were absolutely worth it, financially, creatively, and personally. I was proud of what I had achieved, proud of the independence it gave me, and proud of the example I had set for my son about the value of hard work and determination. My marriage to Patrick was part of that carefully built life, although looking back, I should have paid more attention to the small cracks that had been forming in our relationship over the years. We met 13 years ago at a friend's Christmas barbecue, where Patrick's charm and wit immediately caught my attention. At the time he was 39 years old, the marketing director of a mid-sized tech company with an easy confidence that made him the center of attention at parties and a natural leader in group conversations. In the early years of our marriage, Patrick seemed to genuinely support my business ambitions and was even proud of my success. He often bragged to friends and family about his entrepreneur wife and shared my wins as if they were his own. But as Polar Light Creative grew and started generating more revenue than his corporate salary, something shifted in our relationship. The pride slowly turned bitter. The support became sarcastic praise, and I found myself increasingly downplaying my achievements to avoid the subtle but unmistakable tension that my success seemed to create in our home. However, the most important member of our family was Elliot, my 10-year-old son, whose intelligence and sharpness constantly amazed me. Despite, or perhaps because of, his complete silence, Elliot had never spoken a single word in his entire life, not because of a physical disability or developmental delay, but for reasons that remained a mystery to doctors, therapists, and family members who had done everything they could to encourage him to find his voice. Elliot communicated brilliantly through writing, sign language, and expressive body language, capable of conveying complex thoughts and emotions without words. Elliot's teachers always praised his intelligence, creativity, and compassion, noting that he seemed to understand social dynamics and emotional undercurrents in ways his more talkative peers often did not. But Elliot's silence was always a disappointment to Patrick, who seemed to treat our son's muteness as some kind of reflection of our failure as parents. The first real signs that the life I had carefully built was about to collapse came on a Tuesday morning in late August, when two deputies from the King County Sheriff's Office walked into my office carrying a search warrant and evidence boxes. The warrant alleged that I had systematically embezzled money from client accounts, manipulated financial records to cover my tracks, and used my business as a front for money laundering activities that had allegedly been going on for more than 2 years. The accusations were so detached from reality that my first reaction was confusion rather than fear. I had built my business on meticulous financial processes, detailed record keeping, and transparent communication with clients. Every transaction was documented, every expense was categorized, and every single cent was accounted for through multiple backup systems that I had put in place specifically to protect both my clients and myself from exactly these kinds of accusations. But as the investigation moved forward, and I watched the evidence pile up against me, I began to understand that this was not a case of mistaken identity or sloppy bookkeeping. Someone who understood my business operations, had access to my computer systems, and was familiar with my clients and vendors, had systematically constructed a false narrative of financial crime that seemed to leave my fingerprints everywhere. The forensic accountants hired by the prosecution painted a portrait of a greedy and reckless woman, skimming money from client projects and setting up sophisticated schemes to hide her theft. Bank records showed transfers I had never authorized. Email trails revealed conversations I had never had. Digital timestamps showed me accessing accounts at times when I had solid alibis. It was like watching someone else's life being built to look like my own, except that person was a criminal and a fraud. My lawyer, Angela Foster, was a sharp defense attorney with 20 years of experience in white-collar criminal cases. From our very first meeting, she was blunt about the challenges we were facing. The person who set this up knows exactly how your business works, she told me during a strategy session. They have access to your systems, understand your clients, and had enough time to build a complete false narrative. This isn't random. It's a conspiracy. The phrase, "this is a conspiracy," echoed in my mind for weeks as I tried to figure out who could possibly have both the motive and the means to destroy my life so thoroughly. The list of people with enough access to my business operations was frighteningly short, and as the investigation continued, I found myself questioning relationships and trust I had never thought to doubt before. The answer started to reveal itself about 3 weeks before the trial, when I discovered that Patrick was having an affair with Brianna Scott, a 30-year-old marketing consultant who had been working with his company on several projects over the past year. Brianna was everything I was not: blonde, conventionally beautiful, and possessing a natural femininity that men like Patrick found hard to resist after years of being married to someone who valued profit over appearance. The affair itself was painfully real, but not entirely unexpected. I had felt Patrick slowly pulling away from our marriage for months, finding excuses to work late, taking private phone calls, and showing less interest in family activities or intimate conversations. What I did not expect was the depth of their plot or the effort they had put into pushing me out of their lives. Through Angela's investigation, we discovered that Patrick and Brianna had been planning their future together for nearly a year, and that future had no place for me or Elliot. They had opened joint bank accounts, looked at apartments together, and discussed moving to California, where Brianna had family and Patrick believed he could find better career opportunities. The only obstacle to their happy ending was our marriage, and the inconvenient truth that Elliot required care and attention that neither of them wanted to give. The embezzlement scheme was their solution to multiple problems. By pinning financial crimes on me that could lead to significant prison time, they could end our marriage without going through an expensive divorce, gain custody of Elliot long enough to place him in a special needs care facility, and even position themselves as victims in order to receive sympathy and financial support from family and friends. As the trial date drew closer, I found myself being pulled into the nightmare of legal procedures, media attention, and social isolation that threatened to drain the little emotional energy I had left. Friends began to avoid me, clients canceled contracts, and even relatives seemed to doubt my innocence in the face of such convincing evidence. The loneliness was almost as crushing as the legal danger, making me wonder whether I could survive this ordeal and still keep any relationships or reputation at all. Meanwhile, Elliot became even more withdrawn than usual, spending hours in his room and communicating only when absolutely necessary. I constantly worried about how the stress was affecting him, whether he understood what was happening, and what would happen to him if I were convicted and had to spend years in prison. The trial began on a Monday morning in mid-October, in the courtroom of Judge Patricia Hernandez, a wood-paneled space that looked more like a theater than a place where real lives were decided. The gallery was packed with reporters, curious spectators, and people I recognized but could not place. Former clients, business acquaintances, and neighbors who had come to watch me be humiliated in public. Patrick sat in the front row, playing the role of a supportive husband with a convincingly sincere expression. He wore the dark gray suit I had bought him for his birthday the year before, and his face carried exactly the mix of worry and confusion people expect to see on a man whose wife has been accused of serious financial crimes. Elliot sat beside him, hunched over in his seat, head down, looking smaller and more fragile than his age. Behind them, in the second row, was Brianna Scott, although I didn't know she would be there until I saw her distinctive bleached blonde hair and recognized the confident posture that had caught my attention at several of Patrick's company parties. Her presence felt like a taunt, an intentional provocation, reminding me of everything I had lost and everything she stood to gain from my collapse. ACT5. The prosecution's case was presented in a structured, thorough, and extremely convincing way. Assistant District Attorney Victor Halstead had clearly spent months preparing his presentation, arranging the evidence in a way that told a coherent story of greed, deception, and betrayal leading to the crimes I was accused of. He displayed bank records showing suspicious money transfers, introduced email evidence of exchanges that were claimed to be mine with alleged accomplices, and called witnesses to testify about irregularities they had noticed in billing and project management. Each piece of evidence felt like a nail being hammered into my coffin, carefully crafted to reinforce a story that bore no resemblance to my real actions, yet seemed completely convincing to anyone who didn't know me. I watched the faces of the jury as the evidence was presented, seeing suspicion and rejection replace whatever neutral attitude they might have started with. Angela fought back with everything she had, challenging the authenticity of the digital evidence, questioning the chain of custody of the financial records, and presenting witnesses who testified to my integrity and professionalism. But we were fighting an uphill battle against evidence that seemed overwhelmingly persuasive and comprehensive. The turning point came on Wednesday afternoon, on the last day of testimony. Victor presented what he described as the most damaging evidence against me: recorded phone conversations in which a voice that sounded very much like mine discussed transferring money from client accounts and hiding the transactions by falsifying records. As the recordings were played in the silent courtroom, I felt my last bit of hope dissolve. The voice was so familiar, that even I began to doubt my own memory. Had I forgotten making those calls? Had the stress caused me to lose memories of committing crimes? A CT6. But then Elliot did something that changed everything. My silent son, who had never spoken a single word in his entire life, who communicated only by writing and sign language, who had sat motionless through days of testimony that would decide his mother's fate, suddenly stood up in the gallery and raised his hand. Judge Hernandez noticed immediately. "Yes, young man? Do you need something?" Elliot walked forward in slow, steady steps, his posture straight and his expression more determined than ever. He approached the bailiff and signaled that he needed paper and a pen. The courtroom fell completely silent, everyone sensing that something unprecedented was about to happen. The bailiff handed Elliot a stack of paper and a pen, but my son placed them down with careful precision. He lifted his head and looked at the judge. He turned to look at me, looked at each person in the gallery in turn, and then he spoke, his voice rough and breaking, like a child trying to learn to speak. "Your Honor, my name is Elliot Stanton." The expressions on Patrick's face and mine, and on the faces of everyone who knew about my son's condition, shifted from curiosity to shock when he said, "I am the defendant's son, and I have never spoken before, but I need to tell you that my mother is innocent. I have evidence that proves who really committed these crimes, and I need the court to hear this evidence before you make a decision about my mother's future." Gasps and whispers spread through the courtroom, unlike anything I had ever experienced. Patrick's face went pale. Brianna looked stricken, and I felt as if the world had tilted on its axis. My silent son, in my darkest moment, had found a way to speak. Elliot reached into his backpack and pulled out a small digital recording device, the kind students usually use to record lectures. He handed it to the bailiff, who then passed it to Judge Hernandez. A CT7. "Your Honor," Elliot continued, his voice more stable now. "I recorded my father and his girlfriend planning how to destroy my mother. They thought I wouldn't understand or remember what they said because I can't speak. But I understood everything, and I recorded their conversations because I knew my mother would need proof." Judge Hernandez examined the recording device and had a brief exchange with the court clerk about the proper procedure for admitting new evidence into the trial. Meanwhile, the courtroom buzzed with intense conversations as reporters and spectators tried to process what they had just witnessed. "Mr. Halstead, Ms. Morrison," the judge said, "I will take a short recess so that we can review this evidence. If it is proven to be authentic and relevant, we will need to consider how to proceed." During the recess, the small conference room next to the courtroom was so silent it felt suffocating. There were only three of us: me, Angela, and Elliot. The door was tightly shut, the noise from the hallway swallowed as if it had been devoured. The white fluorescent light shone down on my son's pale face. He sat curled in on himself, his trembling hands resting on the scratched old wooden table. I pushed a stack of blank paper and a pen toward him. There were no therapists, no speech specialists there. I did not dare let my son try to speak. Elliot picked up the pen, his fingers white from gripping it too tightly. He wrote quickly, the letters slanted, slightly shaky but clear in every stroke. I read each line as it appeared in front of me, my heart feeling like it was being crushed. My son wrote very fast, describing how one evening he had hidden in the hallway outside Patrick's home office when he heard loud voices, how he had recorded many conversations over 3 weeks, and how he had waited for the right moment to reveal what he knew. "I was afraid they would hurt you if I spoke too early," he wrote. "I wanted to wait until you really needed help." He looked up at me. His big brown eyes were shiny with tears that would not fall. There was only a silent pain so deep that I felt as if I were being torn apart myself. I pulled his head into my chest, unable to say a word. Angela sat beside me, her hand gripping mine until her knuckles went white. 30 minutes later, the trial resumed. Judge Hernandez announced that the recordings would be played for the jury after being authenticated by the court's technical expert. The quality of the recordings was shockingly clear, and Elliot's strategic position outside the office door had captured every word in multiple conversations between Patrick and Brianna. The first conversation, recorded 3 weeks earlier, laid out their entire plan in astonishing detail. Patrick's voice, my husband's voice, the man I had shared a bed with for 13 years, came through steady, not a hint of shaking. Set the accounts up perfectly. Everything traces back to her computer, access codes, her digital signature. No one can suspect we're involved. Brianna laughed softly, the kind of laugh I had once thought was only for expensive wine parties. What about Elliot? He'll be a problem in our new life. Patrick answered immediately, without hesitation. He's not a problem. He doesn't understand what's going on. Once Lauren is convicted, we can put him in a reform facility in Montana. Problem solved. Brianna, are you sure the evidence will be right? She's not stupid. Then Patrick's voice rose, fake sweet. The voice I once believed was love. She's smart in business, but naive in feelings. She still thinks I love her. She doesn't know what's coming. I sat there, my hands gripping the chair so tightly that my nails broke and bled. But I felt no pain. The second conversation, recorded a week later, was even more damning. Brianna, the trial is about to start. Are you nervous? Patrick laughed, a sound like a blade cutting through my heart. Why would I be nervous? I'll play the role of the perfectly shocked and betrayed husband. The judge will have to nod along. A successful female entrepreneur losing everything, greed tearing her family apart. That's the story they'll want to believe. Brianna, and after that? When she goes to prison? Patrick, we'll start over in California. New city, new life, no more burden. Elliot will be taken care of, and we'll be free to build something real together. The third and final recording captured their conversation just 2 days before the trial began. Patrick's voice dropped, pretending to sigh. I almost feel sorry for Elliot. The kid's a good child, even if he's a bit. Brianna cut in, cold as ice. Don't get soft, you said it yourself. He needs professional care that neither of us can provide. We're helping him by making sure he gets proper treatment. Patrick chuckled softly. You're right. Lauren brought this on herself by being too controlling, too obsessed with that damn career. Maybe prison will teach her some humility. Brianna, by the time she gets out, we'll be settled and successful, and she'll be a middle-aged ex-con with no future. Justice will have been served. The courtroom was completely silent. As the recordings played, I watched the jurors' faces shift from doubt to shock, and then to fury. Some jurors were taking furious notes, while others simply stared at Patrick and Brianna with looks of disgust. Patrick tried to keep his innocent expression during the first recording, but by the third conversation, his mask had completely fallen away. He slumped back in his seat, his face pale, while Brianna looked like she was trying to hold back tears. When the recordings ended, Judge Hernandez spoke in the courtroom with barely controlled anger. Mr. Halstead, in light of this new evidence, how does the prosecution wish to proceed? Attorney Halstead, clearly as stunned as everyone else, slowly stood and said to the court, Your Honor, based on this evidence of conspiracy and perjury, the prosecution moves to dismiss all charges against Ms. Stanton immediately. We will also be filing charges against Mr. Patrick Stanton and Ms. Brianna Scott for conspiracy, fraud, perjury, and conspiracy to kidnap. The judge's response was swift and decisive. Motion granted. All charges against Ms. Stanton are dismissed with prejudice. Bailiffs, please take Mr. Stanton and Ms. Scott into custody. The next few minutes passed in a chaotic blur as officers arrested Patrick and Brianna. Reporters rushed to take notes, and spectators buzzed with excitement at the dramatic turn of events. Throughout it all, Elliot sat quietly beside me, his hand gripping mine tightly, his face calm for the first time in months. Watching Patrick being arrested was especially satisfying. The man who had so cruelly orchestrated my destruction now had to endure the public humiliation of his own, being led away in handcuffs while cameras flashed, and the carefully built fake face he had constructed collapsed completely. "This isn't over, Lauren," he shouted, as the bailiffs escorted him out of the courtroom. "You will pay for this." "No, Patrick," I replied calmly, wrapping my arm around Elliot's shoulders. "You will." Brianna's arrest was quieter, but no less meaningful. The woman who had cruelly destroyed my life and pushed my son toward a mental institution was now facing years in prison for her crimes. As she was led away, she looked at Elliot with hatred, perhaps finally realizing that she had underestimated the quiet boy whose silence had hidden such strength and determination. In the days that followed, the media coverage was loud and overwhelmingly supportive. Elliot's courage in speaking up, both literally and figuratively, captured public attention, transforming him from a potential victim into a hero. Interview requests poured in, although I politely declined them all, wanting my son to return to a quiet life with a clear conscience and the belief that he had saved his mother. The business impact was more complicated, but ultimately positive. Some clients returned immediately, apologizing for doubting my integrity and offering new projects to show their support. Other clients took more time to rebuild trust, but the dramatic exoneration that Elliot's evidence brought about ultimately restored my professional reputation completely. More importantly, this experience taught me invaluable lessons about trust, intuition, and the importance of listening to those who love us most. Elliot had tried to protect me for months, watching and recording evidence of the conspiracy against me, because he understood, without speaking it, that his mother was in danger and needed his help. I only truly understood how terrifying Patrick and Brianna were later, when Elliot wrote for me to read what he had endured during the months I was busy with work and numbers. Elliot once wrote that one evening, while I was still at the office, Patrick brought Brianna home and called him into the study. The room was always closed, always smelled of Brianna's perfume, mixed with the scent of old wood. Patrick sat behind the desk, twirling a metal pen in his hand, his eyes not on Elliot but on the computer screen. Then he said very softly, as if talking about the weather, "Your mother is going far away." Elliot stood still. Patrick tilted his head, looking at him in the way only truly cold people do. "And if you say anything, no one will believe you. No one believes a mute child. No shouting, no obvious threats. Just a simple, smooth sentence, like an obvious fact." What made my hands shake the most when reading the lines Elliot wrote was that Patrick had tried to turn my son into unreliable. He had secretly arranged an appointment with Elliot's psychologist. He didn't tell me. In that meeting, Patrick said that Elliot had unstable behaviors, had tendencies to fantasize, and might make up stories in his head. He wanted a medical record, a label, a stamp on my son, not to help him, but so that if my son said something, no one would believe it. Elliot understood very clearly what they were doing, not with words, but with silence. His silence, which had always been seen as a limitation or a challenge, turned out to be the very quality that allowed him to gather evidence that no one else could have obtained. People underestimated him because he did not speak, never realizing that his silence made him invisible to the adults who were plotting crimes they believed he could not possibly understand. 6 months after the trial, Patrick and Brianna both pleaded guilty to multiple felonies and received significant prison sentences. Patrick was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, while Brianna received 6 years. Neither of them showed any remorse at their sentencing hearing, claiming their actions were justified because of what they considered my controlling behavior and my success. Patrick and Brianna's sentencing took place on a gray April afternoon, with the same relentless Seattle drizzle. I hadn't planned to go, but Angela advised that I should be there. To close it completely, I took Elliot with me. He was 11 years old now, a little taller, but still as silent as ever with the outside world. When it was Patrick's turn to give his final statement before the sentence, he stood up, still trying to keep the air of a wronged man. Then he looked straight at Elliot. "The jury may believe the words of a mute boy, but I will never forgive blood that betrays me." He turned his head, his voice growing softer, but still clear enough for the two of us to hear. "You are the biggest mistake of my life, Elliot. If I ever get out of here, I will make both you and your mother pay 100 times over." The courtroom went completely silent. I felt Elliot's hand trembling in mine in waves. I tightened my grip, expecting him to cry. But no. He just looked at his father for a long time, then quietly pulled a small prepared envelope from his pocket, asking the bailiff to bring it up to the judge's bench. Judge Hernandez opened it and read aloud each neatly handwritten word from my son. "You are the biggest mistake of my life. Now you will have to be silent for 8 years, exactly the time I have been silent. Mother and I will enjoy our lives." She finished reading, said nothing more, and struck the gavel. 8 years in federal prison, no parole. Patrick was led away, this time without shouting, only a final look full of poison toward us. I knew he would carry that hatred for the rest of his life. 2 weeks later, I received an express delivery letter from the federal women's prison in Dublin, California. The sender's name on the envelope was Brianna Scott. Inside was a trembling handwritten letter and an ultrasound photo. "Lauren, I am 21 weeks pregnant. The baby is Patrick's. It will be born in prison. I have no family, no one. Only you have ever been a mother. Please adopt my child. It is only a child, it is innocent. Brianna." I finished reading and placed the letter on the kitchen table, right in front of Elliot. He looked at the ultrasound photo for a long time, then picked up a pen and wrote a single line on the edge of the letter before pushing it back to me. "The child is not at fault, but its mother has already made the choice for it." I folded the letter, put it back into the envelope, wrote 3 words on the front: "Adoption refused," and sent it back to the prison. Not a single line of explanation. I did not need to be kind to someone who had tried to throw my son away like a broken object. Elliot and I moved to a smaller house in a quieter neighborhood, closer to his school and my office. The new space felt lighter and more peaceful than the old house, free from the tension and deception that had marked the last years of my life. Elliot seemed happier and calmer, spending time reading, drawing, and pursuing interests that brought him joy. He still did not use words much, but his ability to communicate through writing had become far more expressive and subtle. Now he wrote poetry, beautiful observations about the world around him, revealing a depth of understanding and emotion that amazed me constantly. His teachers said he was one of the most thoughtful and compassionate students they had ever met. Sometimes people asked me whether I wanted Elliot to start speaking, whether I hoped that his dramatic intervention in court might open something that could lead to verbal communication. But I had learned that Elliot's voice had always been present and powerful. It just did not use sound. His silence was never a limitation. It was simply a different way of existing in this world, one that ultimately saved both of our lives. This experience taught me that strength comes in many forms, that love sometimes demands extraordinary courage, and that the people who understand us best are often the ones who see solutions we ourselves cannot imagine. Elliot's silent testimony became the loudest voice in that courtroom that day, speaking the truth with a power that no false evidence could ever overcome. Today, as I watched my son doing his homework at the kitchen table, writing in the careful handwriting that has become his own signature way of expression, I thought again about the gift his silence has given to both of us. In a world full of noise and lies, his quiet truth cut through every deception and set us free. The boy who was never expected to speak became the voice that saved us both, proving that sometimes the most powerful testimony does not come from what we say, but from what we choose to reveal when silence is no longer an option. One evening in early October, it was raining in Seattle again. I was washing dishes, and Elliot was sitting at the kitchen table drawing. Suddenly, he stood up, walked behind me, and wrapped his arms around my waist like he did every day. I smiled, dried my hands, and turned around to pat his head. And then I heard it. very softly, almost like a breath, but clearly a sound coming from my son's throat for the first time in 11 years of his life. Mom! I froze. Water was still dripping from my hands onto the floor. I slowly knelt down and looked straight into Elliot's eyes. He smiled, the brightest smile I had ever seen, and then repeated it, this time more clearly, even though his voice was still shaky and rough from not being used. Mom, I love you. I held him tightly and cried until my throat hurt. Elliot patted my back, gently, the same way he had comforted me in silence for so many years. After that day, Elliot still did not speak to anyone else. Not to his teacher, not to the therapist, not to friends. He chose to keep his silence with the whole world, like a declaration that his voice was only meant for those who deserved to hear it. And for me, every time I hear him call me Mom in our small, warm kitchen, I remember that sometimes miracles do not need to echo across the sky. They only need a tiny sound, just enough to heal an entire lifetime. And that is enough. Maybe somewhere out there, there's also someone quietly enduring, trying to tell their truth in a way the world is not used to hearing. If you have ever felt ignored, misunderstood, or forced into silence, remember that your voice always has value, even if it doesn't sound like anyone else. And if this story made you pause for a moment to think about family, about trust, or about the strength of quiet people, leave a small sign in the comments. Because maybe your sharing is also a way to help someone else out there feel less alone.